Welcome to the deep dive. You guys sent in some seriously fascinating stuff, articles and notes about psychological operations.
Psy Ops.
Psy Ops, yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And their impact on privacy in this digital world that we live in.
Yeah.
So get ready to explore how these tactics are being used,
Right.
the role big tech plays in all this,
Absolutely.
and what you can do to protect yourself.
Yeah, it's a topic that's more relevant now than ever before, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're going to break it all down.
Okay, so
Demystify some of these strategies.
let's start with the fundamentals.
Yeah.
For those of us who maybe aren't military strategists,
Right.
what exactly are psyops, and how are they showing up in the modern world?
So think of psyops as carefully crafted campaigns that are designed to influence your thoughts, your beliefs, and your actions.
Mm-hmm.
They use information and psychological tactics to kind of subtly nudge you in a particular direction.
Okay.
Now, while they were traditionally used in warfare, we see them a lot now in politics, in marketing, even in our everyday lives.
So it's not just soldiers on a battlefield being targeted.
Right.
It's happening to all of us all the time.
Precisely every day,
Yeah.
we are bombarded with messages that are aimed at influencing our choices.
Wow.
Everything from the ads that we see online to the news that we consume.
Yeah.
And the sources that you sent in actually highlight some specific tools that are used in modern psyops.
Okay.
And this is where it gets really interesting.
The source material mentions things like psychological triggers.
Yes.
What are those?
Okay.
And how are they used to influence us?
So psychological triggers exploit our natural emotional responses.
Okay.
So for instance, fear is incredibly powerful.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody can make you afraid, they can often control your actions.
Right.
Think about those fear-mongering political ads or clickbait headlines that are designed to really tap into those anxieties.
I see those all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not just about the message itself.
Uh-huh.
It's
Yeah.
about how it's delivered and the emotions that it triggers.
It feels manipulative.
It is manipulative. That's exactly what it is. The goal is to bypass your rational thinking
Wow.
and tap into your emotional core.
Okay.
Another example is the use of authority figures.
Right.
We're more likely to trust somebody than we see as an expert.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Advertisers use this all the time.
Yeah.
Featuring celebrities or doctors endorsing their products.
It's like they're hacking our trust in a way.
They are.
What about the strategic silence that was mentioned in one of the articles?
Oh, yeah.
That seems almost counterintuitive.
Silence can be very powerful.
Yeah.
So let's say a salesperson, they use silence after a pitch.
Right.
That awkward pause can trigger feelings of obligation or urgency in you,
Uh-huh.
which pushes you towards a decision.
Wow, I never thought of it that way.
It's like they're playing mind games.
They are.
And these tactics are becoming even more sophisticated with the rise of targeted marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where big tech enters the picture.
Right, because companies like Google and Facebook, they have a massive amount of data on us.
They know what we search for, they know what we like, they know our social connections.
Yeah, it's kind of scary.
It is.
Yeah.
And, this data allows them to create incredibly detailed profiles
Mm-hmm.
and predict our preferences
Uh-huh.
and even our vulnerabilities.
Wow.
And it's all about tailoring those psyops to specific individuals,
Okay.
making them incredibly persuasive.
That's a little unnerving.
It is a little unnerving.
Yeah.
It sounds like something out of a dystopian novel.
It does.
There are definitely valid concerns.
Yeah.
And it's not just about personalized ads.
Right.
The sources that you provided actually highlight how these tactics are being used to amplify certain messages while suppressing others.
You mean like censorship?
It can be.
Are we being deliberately kept in the dark about certain things?
It can be more subtle than outright censorship.
Okay.
Algorithms can be designed to prioritize certain content in your news feed or in your search results,
Mm-hmm.
effectively burying dissenting viewpoints.
Yeah.
This creates those echo chambers where you're only exposed to information that reinforces your existing beliefs.
So instead of getting the full picture, we're only seeing a curated version of it.
Exactly.
That's wild. Okay, what about this concept of authority establishment that was mentioned in the sources?
Right. So we tend to trust information that comes from sources that we see as credible.
Makes sense.
Scientists, government officials, respected news outlets.
Right.
But what happens when these authorities provide conflicting information like we saw during the pandemic?
Right. There was so much confusion about masks and vaccines.
Exactly.
It seemed like every expert had a different opinion.
And that confusion itself can be a powerful manipulation tactic.
Really?
When we don't know who to believe, we may become disillusioned and withdraw from engaging with the information altogether.
So it's not just about pushing a specific narrative, it's also about undermining trust in general.
Precisely. It's about creating doubt and uncertainty,
Okay.
making you more susceptible to manipulation.
So speaking of big tech, the sources point to them playing a really central role in all of this.
They do.
Right? They have this incredible amount of data in these powerful platforms. But how exactly are they using them for psyops?
Okay, so think of it like this: big tech have a megaphone
Okay.
that can whisper directly into the ears of millions.
Wow.
They can identify target audiences. They can suppress opposing views through algorithms and censorship, and amplify chosen narratives across all platforms.
The source material mentions something called the redirect method that's used by Google.
Yes.
What exactly is that?
So the redirect method is a program that's designed to counter extremism.
Okay.
So Google uses your data to identify individuals who might be susceptible to extremist ideologies, and then they subtly alter search results to expose these individuals to alternative viewpoints.
So instead of seeing websites promoting hate speech,
Right.
they might see articles promoting tolerance and things like that.
Exactly.
It almost sounds like a positive use of psyops.
On the surface, it appears to be a beneficial application.
Right.
However, it raises some serious ethical questions.
Like, who gets to decide what's considered extremist?
Oh.
And what's to stop this technology from being used to suppress any dissenting voices?
Right. And those are precisely the concerns.
Yeah.
While the intentions may be good, the potential for misuse is significant.
Right.
It raises questions about freedom of thought and who gets to control the information that we see.
So even seemingly positive applications of psyops can be problematic.
They can.
It's a bit unnerving, to be honest.
It is. And it highlights the importance of understanding these tactics
Yeah.
and being aware of how they're being used.
Right.
The more we know, the better equipped we are to protect ourselves.
The sources you shared included some pretty chilling historical examples of psyops in action.
Yes.
I was particularly struck by the story of the Jonestown Massacre.
Right. So the Jonestown Massacre is a tragic example of the devastating power of psyops. Jim Jones, the cult leader, he used controlled messaging and isolation to manipulate his followers. And it ultimately led to the deaths of over 900 people, including himself.
It's a stark reminder of how vulnerable we can be to these tactics, especially when they're used by charismatic leaders.
Absolutely.
Or within closed communities where information is tightly controlled.
Right. And it's not just isolated incidents.
Okay.
The Gulf of Tonkin Incident, where a fabricated event was used to justify escalating U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War,
Right.
demonstrates how psyops can shape geopolitical decisions on a global scale.
It's scary to think how these tactics can be used to manipulate entire nations.
It is.
So with all this manipulation going on, what can we do to protect ourselves?
Yeah.
What are our options?
The key lies in protecting your data and being aware of these tactics. The sources recommend using privacy-focused tools like privacy phones,
Okay.
VPNs, and anonymous email services.
Let's take a look at some of those options.
Okay.
Let's start with privacy phones. What makes them different from regular smartphones?
So devices like the Brax 3 are specifically designed to minimize data tracking.
Yeah.
They use alternative operating systems, and they limit the apps that can collect your information. They're built with privacy as a priority.
So it's like having a phone that's not constantly spying on you
Essentially, yes.
and reporting back to tech company.
A privacy phone gives you much more control over your data,
Okay.
making it harder for companies to build those detailed profiles that we discussed earlier.
Right.
It's a way to reclaim your digital privacy.
That makes sense. And what about VPNs? I've heard the term, but I'm not entirely clear on how they work or why they're important for privacy.
Sure, so a VPN, or a virtual private network, masks your IP address,
Okay.
which is like your unique digital fingerprint.
Mm-hmm.
This makes it much harder for websites and companies to track your online activity.
Oh, okay.
It's like browsing the internet incognito.
So it adds an extra layer of privacy
It does.
and makes it harder for companies to target me with personalized ads. Yes.
Or manipulate my search results based on my browsing history.
Exactly. It gives you a degree of anonymity online,
Okay.
making it much harder for companies to build a profile based on your online behavior.
Gotcha.
It's a powerful tool for anyone who's concerned about online privacy.
And finally, what are anonymous email services?
Okay.
Why would someone choose to use those?
So anonymous email services allow you to send and receive emails without revealing your true identity.
Okay.
They use encryption and other security measures to protect your communications from prying eyes. This
Hmm.
is especially useful for journalists, activists, or anyone who needs to communicate sensitive information securely.
So if I'm worried about someone monitoring my emails
Right.
or trying to track my communications, these services can help me stay under the radar.
That's right. They provide an additional layer of protection for your communications,
Okay.
making it much harder for third parties to intercept or monitor your emails.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground already.
We have.
It's clear that psyops are more prevalent than ever. Yeah, but understanding how they work is the first step towards resistance.
You got to knowledge is power.
Yeah.
Once you understand the tactics, you can start to see through the manipulation and think for yourself.
It's like learning a secret code that allows you to see through the matrix
Right.
and decode the messages and make informed decisions based on facts and critical thinking,
Absolutely.
rather than just emotional manipulation.
You got it. Welcome back to the deep dive. We're continuing our exploration of psyops and their impact on privacy in the digital age.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still processing all this information.
Right.
It's amazing how these tactics are used in ways we don't even realize.
Yeah, we've only just scratched the surface.
Right.
We're about to go even deeper
Okay.
into real-world examples of how these tactics are used.
Okay.
Buckle up.
I'd like to go back to something we talked about in the first part. How seemingly positive uses of psyops, like Google's redirect method, can raise ethical concerns.
Right? While redirecting people away from extremist content seems like a good thing,
Yeah.
the method itself raises questions about freedom of thought and manipulation.
It feels a bit like a digital thought police
Yeah.
who decides what's considered extremist
Exact.
and what's to stop this technology from being used to suppress any dissenting voices. It feels like a slippery slope.
Yeah, those are valid concerns.
Mm-hmm.
It all comes down to transparency and accountability
Okay.
in how these technologies are developed and used.
So it's not just about the technology itself, Right. but about the intentions behind it and the potential for misuse.
Exactly.
Like almost like any tool, it can be used for good or bad.
Any technology, even one designed for good, can be used for nefarious purposes in the wrong hands.
That makes me think about the historical examples we touched on earlier, like the Jonestown Massacre and the Gulf of Tonkin Incident.
Yeah.
Those were such powerful illustrations of how psyops can be used to manipulate people and even influence global events.
So the Jonestown Massacre is a chilling example of how psyops can be used to create a controlled environment.
Yeah.
Jim Jones isolated his followers and bombarded them with carefully crafted messages, creating this artificial reality where his word was law.
Wow.
It's a tragic demonstration of how vulnerable we can be to these tactics, especially within closed communities where information is tightly controlled.
It's scary to think how people can be manipulated to such an extent.
It is.
And the Gulf of Tonkin incident is another prime example of how these tactics can be used on a global scale.
Right. The Gulf of Tonkin incident, where a fabricated event was used to justify escalating U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War, shows how psyops can shape geopolitical decisions and influence the course of history.
It's a stark reminder that these tactics aren't just something out of a spy novel.
Right.
They have real-world consequences
Absolutely.
that impact the lives of millions.
And it's not just governments using these tactics.
Okay.
Our source material also mentions how psyops are being used in everyday life, even in our personal relationships.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about it in that context.
Think about how we use persuasion, manipulation, and emotional appeals to influence people around us,
Okay.
like trying to convince a friend to do something they don't want to do, or using guilt trips to get our way.
Oh, yeah. Now that you mention it, it happens all the time.
All the time.
We try to influence each other, even if we don't realize it.
Right.
So it's not just about big, organized campaigns.
Okay.
It's also about the subtle ways we use these tactics in our daily interactions.
Precisely. We all have the potential to utilize psyops in our daily lives.
Wow.
And that's why it's so important to be aware of these dynamics
Yeah.
and make sure that we're using our influence ethically and responsibly.
It's a good reminder to be mindful of our own behavior and ensure we're not manipulating others for personal gain.
Exactly.
It's about using our influence to build healthy relationships and create positive change, not exploit or control others.
Right.
We have a responsibility to act with integrity and respect.
Well said. Now, moving from personal interactions to a larger scale, let's dive into some other real-world examples of psyops being used.
Okay.
We already touched on the Gulf of Tonkin incident and the Jonestown Massacre. Are there other compelling historical examples you'd like to explore?
I'm particularly interested in how psyops are being used in the digital age, especially with the rise of social media. It seems like these platforms would be a breed of the ground for manipulation.
You're absolutely right. Social media is a fertile ground for psyops.
Yeah.
Their vast reach and ability to target specific demographics make them powerful tools for those looking to influence opinions and behavior.
That's an intense thought.
It is.
Can you give me some specific examples?
We've seen evidence of foreign governments using social media to interfere in elections, spread disinformation, and sow discord.
Okay.
The Russian interference in the 2016 U.S. presidential election is a prime example.
That was a major news story. Can you refresh my memory on what happened?
Sure. Russian operatives created fake social media accounts and spread divisive content aimed at influencing voters and undermining trust in the democratic process. They exploited algorithms and social media's tendency to create echo chambers to amplify their messages and create a sense of chaos and distrust.
That's terrifying. It shows how vulnerable even the most established democracies can be to these kinds of attacks in the digital age. It's a reminder of how important vigilance, critical thinking, and media literacy are.
It is a serious threat.
Yeah.
And it highlights the need for us to be discerning consumers of information, especially online.
Right.
We need to be able to separate fact from fiction and recognize when we're being manipulated.
It's like we need to develop a healthy skepticism of everything we see online.
Exactly.
Not everything is as it appears.
We should always question the source of information, consider the author's motivations,
Okay.
and look for evidence to support the claims being made.
Gotcha. So don't just take things at face value. It's almost like we need to become amateur detectives just to navigate the online world safely.
That's a great way to put it. Our ability to think critically and make informed decisions is essential for protecting ourselves from manipulation and preserving our democratic values.
It's a lot of responsibility, but it sounds essential if we want to stay informed and avoid being manipulated.
It is, but remember, we're not powerless.
Okay.
We can take steps to protect ourselves.
Okay.
Understanding these tactics is the first step.
That's reassuring. We're not just passive victims.
Right.
We have the power to fight back.
Absolutely. And on that note, let's move on to some practical tips for protecting ourselves from psyops in the digital age.
That sounds like a great place to pick up after the break.
Okay.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been exploring this kind of unsettling world of psyops, and I think I'm ready to kind of shift gears a bit here.
Okay.
We've talked about how these tactics are used,
Right.
but I want to focus on what we can do to protect ourselves.
Right.
What are some practical steps that we can take to kind of navigate this digital minefield?
It all starts with awareness.
Okay.
Once you understand the tactics, you can start to see through the manipulation.
Yeah.
The sources you provided actually offer some really great tips for safeguarding your data,
Okay.
recognizing those manipulation tactics, and sharpening your critical thinking skills.
So let's break those down one by one.
Okay.
First up, protecting our data. What are some simple things that we can all do to make ourselves less vulnerable to these psyops campaigns?
One of the most fundamental things is to be mindful of the information that you share online.
Okay.
Think twice before posting those personal details on social media
Right.
or signing up for websites that require a lot of information. Treat your personal data like a valuable asset that needs to be protected.
That's a great analogy. It's easy to forget that our data has value and that companies are collecting it for a reason.
Exactly. And be wary of those free services that seem too good to be true. They're often collecting and selling your data to advertisers or other third parties.
Oh, wow. So there's no such thing as a free lunch, especially in the digital world.
Especially in the digital world.
What about passwords and security?
Yeah.
Are there any basic steps we should be taking to secure our accounts?
Absolutely. Use strong passwords and enable two-factor authentication on your accounts.
Okay.
This makes it much harder for hackers to access your information.
Okay.
It's like putting an extra lock on your digital doors.
Those are simple steps, but they can make a big difference.
Yeah.
What about software updates?
Software updates often include security patches that protect against vulnerabilities. So it's crucial to keep your software updated. Think of it as reinforcing your digital defenses against those potential threats.
So it's not just about being careful with what we share.
Yes.
It's also about taking those proactive steps to secure our devices and accounts.
Precisely. And consider using privacy-focused tools like VPNs, encrypted messaging apps, and privacy-focused browsers. These tools add an extra layer of protection and make it harder for companies to track your online activity. It's about taking control of your digital footprint and being mindful of who has access to your data.
We talked about those a little earlier,
Mm-hmm.
and it sounds like they can really help us maintain some anonymity in the digital world.
Exactly. It's not about being completely off the grid,
Right.
but it's about making informed choices.
Okay.
Now let's move on to recognizing manipulation tactics. How can we get better at spotting when we're being targeted by psyops?
That's a skill I'd love to develop. It feels like it's getting harder and harder to separate fact from fiction these days.
It is. One key is to pay attention to the language being used.
Okay.
Look for emotionally charged words, fear-mongering tactics, or attempts to oversimplify complex issues.
Okay.
It's like learning to decode the language of manipulation.
So instead of just reacting emotionally to a headline or a social media post, we need to take a step back and analyze the language being used.
Exactly. And be wary of sources that present information in a biased or one-sided way. Look for evidence-based reporting that considers multiple perspectives.
So don't just believe everything you read or hear.
Right.
Do your own research and look for corroborating sources. It's about being an active and informed participant in the information landscape.
You got to be especially skeptical of information that's spread through social media or other online channels where it's easy to create fake accounts and spread disinformation.
Right, like those echo chambers we talked about earlier.
Exactly.
They can be really dangerous because they reinforce our existing beliefs and make us less likely to question the information.
It's crucial to step outside of those echo chambers
Okay.
and expose yourself to diverse perspectives, even if those perspectives make you uncomfortable.
It's about challenging our own biases and assumptions.
Exactly. Developing a healthy skepticism and being willing to challenge your own beliefs is key.
Okay.
Finally, let's talk about critical thinking. This is a crucial skill for navigating the digital age.
It sounds like something we should all be working on. How can we develop our critical thinking skills?
So critical thinking is the ability to analyze information, objectively identify biases, and make sound judgments based on evidence and logic.
Oh, okay.
It's not just about having opinions.
Right.
It's about backing those opinions up with reason and evidence.
I like that.
It's about engaging in thoughtful debate, considering different viewpoints, and being open to changing your mind when presented with new information.
It sounds like a valuable skill for life in general, not just for navigating the online world.
It is one way to develop critical thinking is to practice active listening.
Okay.
Really pay attention to what others are saying, even if you disagree. Try and understand their perspective and identify the underlying assumptions that inform their beliefs.
Okay.
It's about listening to understand, not just to respond.
That's such an important point. It's so easy to just wait for your turn to speak instead of truly listening to what the other person is saying.
You're right. And don't be afraid to ask clarifying questions.
Yeah, okay.
Challenge assumptions or seek clarification on points you don't understand. Be like an inquisitive student, always seeking to learn more and deepen your understanding.
I love that image. It's about approaching the world with curiosity and a thirst for knowledge.
Exactly. And be willing to change your mind if someone presents evidence that contradicts your beliefs.
Okay.
Don't dig in your heels. Be open to the possibility that you might be wrong.
That's a good reminder. It's about humility and a willingness to learn and grow.
Precisely, critical thinking is an ongoing process. It's not about reaching a definitive answer, but about engaging in a thoughtful and informed dialogue.
Well said. Those are fantastic tips I think we can all benefit from. It's empowering to know that we can take steps to protect ourselves and make informed decisions.
That's the key takeaway. We're not powerless in the face of these tactics.
Right.
We have agency. We can make choices that protect our privacy and our minds.
That's a great note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us for this fascinating and thought-provoking deep dive.
It's been my pleasure. Remember, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay empowered.
That's great advice. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this exploration of psyops and privacy in the digital age. Until next time, stay vigilant and keep those critical thinking skills sharp